Each December, Buddhists, particularly those of the Zen tradition, commemorate the awakening of the historical Buddha. I talked with Dr. David Williams, MRO, member of the Buffalo Zen Dharma Community, about the meaning of awakening, the awakening of the historical Buddha, and how it is commemorated by the Buffalo Zen Dharma Community. Welcome, Dr. Williams.
Thank you. Good morning.
And we speak, if I just call you David and you can call me Stan during the conversation.
Great.
But you are a physician.
Yes.
And you are the medical facilities director at Attica Prison.
That's correct. Yes.
So it's got to be a fairly intense job at times.
Oh, you're right about that. That's for sure.
And I know other times we've been talking and you get calls even when you're not at work.
Yes, that's part of the job.
Well, you are also a formal student at the Mountain Rivers Monastery. Can you say a little bit about the monastery?
Yes, the founding abbot, John Didalori, about 40 years ago, first started the place as a Zen Arts Center, but that quickly changed to be Zen Mountain Monastery, and he started the Mountains and Rivers Order. The Mountains and River Order has several subdivisions. There's the Fire Lotus Temple in New York City, in Brooklyn. They also have affiliates around different places in Vermont. Of course, there's one, Buffalo Zen Dharma Community in Buffalo. There's one even as far away as New Zealand. So the Mountains River Order is sort of the broad group, and then underneath that would be Zen Mountain Monastery, where the order is centered, plus the temple in New York City and these other affiliates.
Now, your dress is reflective of being part of the Mountain and Rivers Monastery.
Yes, the gray robe that you see, every time someone's a formal student, they get a gray robe. And if someone wants to take their practice a little bit further, then they may get a raksu, this black piece of cloth that we hang around our neck. Zen, which is Zen training, which happens at the monastery and can happen or be available to anybody in any religion, whether someone's a Christian or Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, or whatever. But if someone is going to take Zen training as a Buddhist, then one of the things they do is take the precepts, which is rules or guidelines for how to behave, I guess you could say it's similar to the 10 Commandments. And during that process of publicly stating that these guidelines you're going to follow, you get this piece of cloth we call a raksu that we've been sewing on for about a week during a period of study just before the ceremony, the Jukai ceremony, where we get the raksu and publicly declare that we want to take the precepts and formally be a Buddhist.
Well, you're also a member of the Buffalo Zen Dharma Community.
Yes, that's correct.
And it's a gathering here in Western New York.
It is. We've been meeting for many years. It didn't first start out as being a Zen Buddhist organization, but it eventually became an affiliate of the Mountains and Rivers Order of Zen Mountain Monastery, and we basically follow their guidelines or guidance. Some of the teachers will come and help hold meditative retreats. Of course, that's been put off because of COVID, but they do give us support and guidance. And many of our members, not all of them, but many of them are students, formal students there, and they will go back and forth to the events at the monastery.
Well, we're here today to talk about the enlightenment of the historical Buddha. But yes, I think your own life journey really helps us understand the meaning of enlightenment. So Can you tell your own story of your enlightenment and your move to Buddhism?
Sure. I was raised in the Presbyterian Church, and I tried to follow the teachings of that very closely. I was quite involved in the church. But when I was a young adult, I got to the point of feeling it. I wanted to go beyond. I wanted to go deeper than what I felt as though I was going to be able to get through the Presbyterian Church. I was attracted to Christian mysticism, and particularly in the Catholic Church, where it seemed to have a richer history. So I eventually became Catholic and started to read about the mystics. But the more I read the mystic literature in Christianity, the more there was a mention of like Zen Buddhism. So it piqued my interest, but not until it was about 1986 when I was introduced to a pamphlet at the time called The Miracle of Mindfulness by a Vietnamese Zen Buddhist, Thich Nhat Hanh, that I realized that in Buddhism, the religion basically is a mystical religion, and you have no problems accessing that type of spirituality. Whereas I think in Western Christianity, that's sort of a sideline. It's not as common. So that's how I became into Buddhism. But there was one of the things that really formulated my following Buddhism was my work, where when I was in Detroit, Michigan, working for Henry Ford Health System, many of my patients had AIDS, and back then it was much more difficult disease to treat. We didn't have the treatment we have today, and a lot of them there was a lot of suffering and death, and that made me start to think about my own mortality and how there's no escaping getting older, getting sick, and dying. And that was basically the same sort of history with the historical Buddha, where he basically lived a life of pleasure. He was born into a royal family in a kingdom in Nepal about 2,500 years ago. And his father loved him so much that he tried to keep anything unpleasant away from him, which he could do within the palace grounds. But as you can imagine, for any young person, I mean, he eventually became married and had a child. He wanted to know what was it like beyond the palace grounds, and he had his royal charioteer take him out. And for the first time, and in a very abrupt and shocking way, he saw the sufferings that came from old age, sickness, and death. And of course, they didn't have hospitals there. They didn't have antibiotics. They didn't have orthopedic surgeons. So if you had a crush injury on a leg or something, I mean, the horrors of what old age, sickness, and death really struck him. And he felt he had to answer this. And he thought that his life of pleasure, where he basically only had to worry about what's the next enjoyable thing about life, wasn't going to answer it. So he joined some forest ascetics who lived a very austere spiritual life with fasting and meditation. But after a while, he felt that that really wasn't doing it for him. He mastered those techniques. So he left and he just sat himself underneath a tree, meditating, and said, I'm not going to leave until I find the answer. And when dawn came and he saw the morning star, that's when he had enlightenment. And there were a lot of parallels with that story to my own, feeling as though I had to answer my own old age, sickness, and death. And I didn't feel as though my initial religious training helped with that. And so then I started to follow Buddhism a lot more closely because of those parallels.
Well, how will the Buddhists commemorate the awakening, which is at least on the calendar on the 8th of December every year, commemoration of the awakening of the historical Buddha? How will Buddhists, and particularly here in Western New York, commemorate the awakening?
Well, there are different lineages of Buddhism, and they probably all have their own traditional ways of doing it. In the Mountains and Rivers order, what will be happening at the monastery on the weekend after the 8th, they all have a Buddha's Enlightenment Vigil. It'll start up on Friday night. People who meet the COVID restriction can come in, and participate. They will have sort of like an introduction. Then that Friday night, they'll start meditating, which will go straight through until Sunday about 6 p.m., where they will break the vigil and they'll have a liturgy, a service, and then the vigil will end. And they'll basically sit through the night. Now, we've done that also here in the past with the Buffalo Zen Dharma Community, but with the COVID and everything, and now with us meeting through Zoom, we won't have a face-to-face meeting like that. So I think right now, mostly what will happen is either the members will join through live stream with the monastery on the weekend. Some may, depending on their schedule, sit later that night on the 8th of December. So a lot just probably depends on their schedule and what time they can devote to that important holiday.
Well, you use the term sitting. Can you say just a few words about that?
Well, that's a common word that we will use is to refer to meditation, or what we also call zazen, where we will sit in a certain position that facilitates clearing the mind, and we will start to, and it depends on the person. If they're just a beginner, it's a little bit different than someone who's been doing it for many years, but it's basically a term we use to refer to meditation.
Now, one of the things that we find in particularly Zen Buddhism is the ikebana. So we have some pictures of that, but can you tell us generally what is ikebana?
Well, ikebana basically is a Japanese art of flower arranging. And in the Mountains and Rivers Order, as a formal student, there are 8 things about training. One of those, there's academic study, there's meeting with the teacher, but one of those 8 gates, as we call them, is art practice, which initially when I started up as a student at the Mountains and Rivers Order, it was a bit strange because I never had that sort of thing in my Christian training. But actually art is prevalent through all religions, and the way we use it specifically in Zen Buddhism, and particularly in our order, is we use it to help us open up to enlightenment, open up our minds to what that experience has to offer. So the pictures that you're about to see are a particular type of ikebana. Ikebana can be different depending on the situation. Ikebana can be in a large display on a stage, or it can be also in a department store. It can be at home on the dining room table. It can be a centerpiece, or even an arrangement that's in the corner of a home, next to a door or something. But these arrangements that you're about to see are noted for their simplicity. And that's what we try to do with our mind, just let go of thoughts. We recognize them, we don't chase after them, we don't hang on to them. We just recognize them and let them flow in and out of our consciousness like clouds in the sky. And so what these pictures do, hopefully, we're revealing the true nature of these flowers and how they're arranged, that will spark an opening in the person's mind that allows them to see beyond themselves.
So they're variant arrangements, and these were sent to you by an artist who's Buddhist, correct?
Yeah, well, she isn't Buddhist, but she is probably the most outstanding teacher in our school. I'm a member of the Ichio School of Ikebana, and she made these arrangements, and her name is Elaine Joe. She's been doing Ikebana for decades. She's trained in Japan. And the ones that are here are particularly simplistic forms. Some forms of ikebana can be very large and complex, but the ones that seem to kind of parallel the simplicity that we're trying to have in our mind, the letting go and getting beyond thoughts, these arrangements can be very powerful.
Well, Dr. David Williams, thank you for joining us on Kaleidoscope and talking about awakening, the awakening of the Buddha, and sharing the wonderful flower arrangements of ikebana. Thank you for being with us today.
You're certainly welcome. Thank you.